thank you so much, Jake, for joining me today. Really excited to talk about your journey in life, man, everything you've done up to this point and everything you're going to do. But before we kind of get into Groundswell, kind of take us a little bit back through your journey. I know you've talked about it through your book and a bunch of the interviews you've done and all the speaking stuff you've done. But talk us through maybe before Team Rubicon with the Marines, and then we'll sort of get into Groundswell and sort of becoming a startup founder.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here joining you. Yeah, I definitely have a non-typical journey toward being a software CEO and startup founder. I guess I kind of always wanted to do something entrepreneurial. Not quite sure I took the straight and narrow path to getting there. I ended up joining the Marine Corps after college, decided to enlist back in 2005. And, that was a kind of an interesting decision, obviously a very consequential decision since we were in wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And, ended up serving for 4 years in the Marine Corps, mostly did most of my time overseas. Spent my first tour in Iraq as part of an infantry rifle squad, running counterinsurgency operations there, and then later joined a scout sniper unit and served in Afghanistan as part of a 6-man scout sniper team. And, looking backwards, I often tell people that that's actually where I learned how to be an entrepreneur. You think about what it takes to run and build a company. It's how do you persist and overcome challenges? How do you navigate uncertainty and ambiguity? How do you do more with less? When you're facing limited resources and limited information, and certainly didn't learn how to read financial statements or pitch a venture capitalist, but learned how to overcome all those other things. And so ended up getting out of the Marine Corps in late 2009. And, I kind of thought, my time doing the crazy stuff was over. I figured I'd go back to graduate school, get my MBA. The economy was in the tank after the Great Recession. So job prospects weren't looking great leaving the Marines. And I got accepted to graduate school to go to UCLA. But before the school year started, this is still 9 months away. I was watching the news and the Haiti earthquake happened. And so having just gotten out of the Marines and gotten back from a couple of hard tours, I was watching that horrible disaster unfold. And for those of your listeners that don't remember, this is 2010. And, they estimate about 150,000 people died instantly in that earthquake, which is just a, gobstopping number.
Yeah, you can't even comprehend it, really.
You can't. And they say about another 100,000 people would die in the coming months. And so, watching all of that, I just felt compelled to help in some way beyond just texting, $10 to the Red Cross like everybody else was. And so ended up working with a couple of other veterans and some doctors. We organized a team and we went down to Port-au-Prince right after the earthquake and just started working. And in doing that, we're talking just days after the earthquake. So we're down there in the thick of it. It was honestly, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. But we just started to realize that the experiences that we had as military veterans, particularly overseas, made us really adept at navigating the chaos of that post-disaster situation. And so we came back from Haiti after a couple of weeks and decided to form a nonprofit organization that we call Team Rubicon, with that simple premise being that we could build a best-in-class disaster response organization by recruiting men and women who had served in the military to repurpose their skills and experience for humanitarian work. And so, man, it's been 13 years. The organization has scaled from those original 8 volunteers to a global organization that counts over 160,000 volunteers on its rosters and, operates a $75 million annual budget, which is just, unbelievable to think about. And I can't say it was an easy journey. Full of ups and downs, all of the classic entrepreneurial stories of, near-death experiences for the company. But, the organization is doing incredibly well. I would put us up against any organization on the planet in terms of the efficacy of our programs and the impact that we're driving communities across the country and around the world.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I've known Team Rubicon for years and years. I remember just watching some of the work and, reading a lot of stuff they've done. And it was after the Haiti earthquake, because I had went to Haiti as well after that. And I remember reading about Team Rubicon sort of being there and sort of kind of doing that work that is, incredibly, incredibly difficult, because you see such destruction, life loss at the same time. It's so overwhelming, and it's got to be emotionally draining, also physically, right? There's sort of combination of both of those things when you're on the ground, like right after it happens. It's so, from friends deal with that sort of similar thing after Hurricane Katrina, having some cops,
Mm-hmm.
having some friends who are firefighters, kind of, talking to them through when they were down there, kind of similar. It was just like the destruction is it's just, it lets your jaw drop a little bit, but it's also like trying to still save lives, right? And people, still dying like in front of you. It's such a transformational experience in a lot of different ways on so many different sides. But I guess when you come out of that, right, and sort of, sticking with sort of building a nonprofit, right, and kind of that mindset of, let's say, working at it for a decade, what are some of the things that you've learned throughout that sort of decade, let's say, in, the nonprofit? Like you said, you were going to go with your MBA, you were really focused on business. Right now, you're all of a sudden kind of in this nonprofit world, right, which is different and similar in some ways. But I guess, what did you come away from that experience being in the nonprofit world? Perhaps, like, what can be done better, and what are some of the really positive, things you take from your work there?
I think one of the biggest ones is, this sense that the nonprofit space is fundamentally different than the corporate space. And I think that one of the things that we did early at Team Rubicon is we tried to run Team Rubicon like any startup. We had to be ruthlessly efficient. We had to grow, responsibly. We had to manage budgets and execute programs, and ultimately deliver a world-class product. Our product isn't, it's not like Apple. We're not shipping iPhones. We're not building anything in the physical world. And in many regards, we're not even delivering services in the traditional sense of like a white collar professional services firm. But nonetheless, we had a product. It was helping people after disasters. And, we had to build a world-class product. We had to market it. We had to sell it to donors, and we had to deliver it consistently and professionally. And so, I think that the biggest fallacy or trap that people fall into is thinking that, oh, well, nonprofits need to operate differently than for-profits. And yeah, I mean, there are some nuances, but at the end of the day, if you are not taking this as a serious business enterprise, you have no business running a nonprofit. I would not invest my charitable dollars with you if you just saw it as a kind of a mom and pop feel good thing. You need to approach it, like you're going to build a world-class Fortune 500 company. So I think we tried to do that early. We paid attention to things like, building up a brand that could attract strong corporate sponsorships and utilize effective storytelling to build a grassroots movement of both volunteers and donors across the country. And so I think those things paid some great dividends. One of the other things that we really paid attention to is just, how do we measure and report out on our outcomes? People aren't investing their hard-earned money into us, through charitable donations because they don't care about what impact it drives. Yes, donating feels good, and people sometimes do it for that reason, but they're also doing it because they want to create change in the world around them. And so if you're not measuring that change and holding yourself accountable to it, and then reporting that, that impact back to the donor, then you're doing both a disservice to the donor, but more importantly, you're doing a disservice to the communities you're supposed to be serving. And so, we were I would say we were really ruthless in holding ourselves accountable to those outcomes. And frankly, like, we didn't always get it right. I will tell you that, it was a journey to understand the impact that we were having and identifying the impact that, I guess, to use a phrase, that we were still leaving on the table. Like, what was the stuff that we were not accomplishing that we needed to pursue, because it was our obligation to those communities to get it right. And again, that's an ever evolving journey. You're never quite there. If you ever think you're there, then you've already lost. You've convinced yourself that you're doing good enough, and you're never doing good enough so long as the problems exist.
I've talked to several founders over the last year that kind of transition from having a nonprofit to now having for-profit companies. And through those conversations, like, wow, like, running a nonprofit is also like a great internship to become a startup founder in the for-profit side, because there's so much hard things you have to do to start a nonprofit, but also make it sustainable. There's so many different aspects of it. Like you said, I mean, it's not a product, it's sort of an outcome. Fundraising, you still kind of have to do that as a startup founder. It's just, you're kind of doing it in a different way. You have to have a good team around you. You have to be efficient. Like, there's so many similarities that go into starting, for-profit companies that I've really been amazed that everyone I've talked to they've really built really strong startups so far, coming from that nonprofit background. So I was like, when you said you kind of passed on the UCLA MBA and you went and started a nonprofit, I was like, I don't know. I think the nonprofit route actually might have been better for for your ability to learn,
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt that at all. I know what you're saying. I would say calling it an internship is a disservice.
No, I was trying to figure out like another word of like it's a great place to start, right? Like you kind of go through those growing pains in a different way, but also in a very similar way as you would at a company.
I mean, I would argue it's more challenging than operating on the for-profit side, particularly, if you're in an industry that can attract, venture investment, which not every, for-profit startup can do that, but you can't get a bank to loan you money. It's hard to find, again, venture capitalists that are going to be willing to write you that big check. When I was making the leap from Team Rubicon to what I'm doing now with Groundswell, one of my early investors, Heather Hartnett from Human Ventures, who herself has a nonprofit background, is now a VC. Yeah. She kind of laughed after she heard me talking about how easy it was to raise money for Groundswell, and she said, "Now you realize that
hilarious.
When you were running a nonprofit, you were training with ankle weights on."
Yeah.
So, like for any athletes out there that ever trained and put ankle weights on, you know that feeling when you finally take those ankle weights off and you go run, and you feel like it's effortless. And that's kind of what running a nonprofit is. It is harder in almost every respect to run a nonprofit than it is to run a for-profit.
I'm going to ask that when I interview my next investor, if they look at, if a person is a successful nonprofit founder, would that go a long way? And maybe they lack some of the other, usual things you might invest in a startup founder, if that would be one of the criteria that they look at. Because I think it's just, I don't know, it's an impressive feat. Because like you said, I mean, it's so difficult to do so successfully. So Groundswell, I love the idea. And I think it's a growing segment. I guess I'll let you say exactly what it is, but talk about like the idea for Groundswell. When did you know you sort of wanted to make the transition from Team Rubicon to Groundswell? And what was it like, making that decision? Was it difficult, or was it sort of just the right time, right place?
I knew that it was approaching the time for me to move on as CEO of Team Rubicon. I ran it as CEO for 11 and a half years. And I'm a big believer that organizations have to evolve. And part of that evolution is the people that are leading them. And coupled with the fact that I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur again, I wanted to start something else. And I never quite knew what it was going to be. And so I was fortunate to have a strong succession plan in place as we came into 2021. And as I watched my family grow and I watched the organization not just survive, but really thrive during COVID, I just knew that the timing was right. And so tapped my longtime friend and colleague who was serving as our chief operating officer, Art Dela Cruz, on the shoulder and said, "Hey, it's your turn." Art's done a great job of leading the organization for the last 2 years, which is actually kind of hard to, say out loud that it's been 2 years. It doesn't seem like that at all. And then, once I made that decision, it was pretty amazing because, despite having known for a long time I wanted to start another company and that I was not going to be at Team Rubicon in a full-time capacity forever, I just never gave myself the time and space to think about what that next thing might be. Mm-hmm. It felt like cheating, I felt like cheating on my partner, right?
Yeah.
And it was remarkable. As soon as I made the decision, communicated it, I just started coming up with all these ideas, and I would spend all night staring at the ceiling, thinking about them. And one just kept coming back to me. And that was, what ultimately became Groundswell. And it was obviously running Team Rubicon for over a decade. I learned a lot about philanthropy. I think, in the time that I was a CEO, we raised over $300 million. The organization's raised $400 million since inception. So I knew a lot about how philanthropy worked, and I knew where it was inefficient and where it could be improved. And so this idea of democratizing philanthropy, giving everyone the tools to make their giving as effective, impactful, and efficient as, the ultra rich, was really empowering to me, really inspiring. And so kind of latched onto that idea. And, the result has been Groundswell, where we've built the world's most modern donor advised fund, and developed a strategy where we're selling this platform to companies, and through it, they are able to make philanthropy an employee benefit that provides their employees not only with this donor advised fund that is, really powerful in the financial well-being that it can help unlock for those that are charitable, but also makes matching or giving funds to employees to give away effortless for the company. And so really decentralizing what has historically been a centralized corporate decision. The CEO says she wants to support the Red Cross, so that's what they support. Now decentralizing or democratizing that decision and empowering employees to support what matters most to them is, I think, the future of where all of this goes. So, we're excited. We've been at it now for a couple of years. The product's been live for a year. Remarkable results from our early customers, and we think we're onto something.
Did you know what donor advised funds? I guess you were through Team Rubicon. You probably came through your preview before, and you kind of knew what they were. But I guess when you had the idea for Groundswell, was it always going to be around sort of the donor advised fund model, or was that something that kind of came about after the idea was kind of?
No, it was. It was always focused on the donor advised fund. And part of that was I was always frustrated that I didn't have a donor advised fund because I'm not rich. And, it just blew my mind that at the time it was 2021, that in 2021, with all the advances in fintech, financial technology, that nobody had disrupted DAFs. Like you still had to go to these stodgy old brokerages or wealth management firms and fork over like $10,000, $20,000 to have one open. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. I can Venmo the guy that mows my lawn, with a smiley face emoji, and he gets the money instantly. But like, if I want to open a donor advised fund, I got to go, to Vanguard or Fidelity and get the technology equivalent of a root canal to do it. Like, it just didn't make sense.
But I guess when you're starting out, right, you have this sort of idea, it's always a beautiful moment. You're full of invigoration and energy, and you can't wait to, sort of get out in the world and do it. But like in the past, you had to go raise money. You had to go through that process. And although it seemed easier, right, than before, what was that process like? And what was maybe that first year like as, a for-profit entrepreneur versus nonprofit? What was that first 12 months like for you?
Well, yeah, I think I was really lucky in that through my experience running Team Rubicon, I developed a lot of relationships with really great business leaders. And so when I made the decision, I put together the plan and the vision for what we were building. It only took me a couple phone calls to raise the first couple $1 million. And I realized how fortunate I am in having that luxury. Not many people can do that. I think it's a reflection of the way that I'd comported myself over the previous decade. I was a serious entrepreneur. I built a serious nonprofit organization. I invested in those relationships. And again, I think they had watched me grow as an entrepreneur running Team Rubicon. They knew that I could lead. They knew I could build a team. They knew that I held myself and my team accountable to outcomes. I made tough decisions. And, when you're an investor and you're writing early stage, like seed stage checks to entrepreneurs, you're investing in the person. Yeah. So if you can de-risk that decision by knowing the person, that's hacking the game. So was really lucky to be able to raise a pretty substantial round from friends and family. And, these were CEOs and some venture investors. When we went out to go raise our formal round, like our priced round in late 2021, it got a little bit more intense. Now you're on phone calls with senior partners at some of the most iconic venture firms in Silicon Valley. And the heart rate gets going a little bit, but
was the product in the market yet? Or was
no, we were raising all this money pre-product.
Okay.
Which, you can't do that anymore, right? That was 2021. You try to go do that today, you get laughed out of the room. So there was definitely some timing, luck in timing with that. And, you kind of got to make your own luck. I can't say I knew that the venture markets were going to dry up in 2022, which of course they did. It's well documented, but we got a little lucky there, but we were able to capitalize on it. So it was fun. I think we pitched about 8 to 10 top blue chip VC firms. We got term sheets from, I think, 3 of them. And we went with a great investor, Google Ventures, GV as they're known now, led our round, and really lucky to have them on board for the journey.
So the idea is that a company offers this to sort of employees, and it's the employee can, let's say, donate $100 to whatever nonprofit, and the company would normally sort of match it, kind of like a 401k, but for philanthropy. Is that sort of a elementary model or elementary way of looking at it?
Yeah, I think thinking of it like an HSA or a 401k for charity is pretty appropriate. It's a tax advantage giving account. So each employee is getting their own donor advised fund. This isn't like a ruse. They're getting an
I
actual
gotcha.
DAF. And which means that when they put money into their DAF, either, they can do a payroll deduction, they can contribute stock and avoid capital gains taxes. Our platform then automates that company's match, if they're running one, directly into that donor advised fund that the employee controls. So now they can control all the money. They can send it wherever, whenever they want to charity. They can take it with them if they leave the company, just like a 401k. So
Gotcha.
really just rethinking employee giving, because again, it hadn't really evolved over the previous 20 years.
Was that sort of look, when you're building out a platform, right, you have this one idea and it's really powerful idea. Obviously it can scale across any size company. At what point do you look at building out the product, building out like features? 2 years now, is it difficult to kind of add these different things? Because now you have it's volunteering, corporate grants, employee experiences. Like there starts to be this platform now that gets sort of bigger and bigger. Like how do you assess adding, let's say, new features that sort of welcomes this, because the idea is amazing and that could scale on its own? How do you choose to build out new features, for Groundswell and for the product line?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got a list of features we want to build. It's as long as my arm. There's no shortage of ideas, and I think we've got a lot of ideas on our product roadmap that are really innovative and that we're really excited to build. Ultimately, we're listening to customers. We know that there are some things that our platform currently lacks that some of the legacy competitors have. And some of those things are things that we never intend to build because we think that they're nothing more than, dog and pony shows for the purposes of demos, and they lack impact and utilization. There are other things that we know we're going to have to build, and it's just a matter of time. So it's a balance of prioritizing some of those kind of feature parity decisions, like, hey, we kind of have to do this because all the competitors have it. And balancing that against some of the net new stuff that's really exciting that could be highly differentiating for us, but you kind of got to earn the right to build those. So that's a constant balance. Again, it really comes down to listening to our customers, being diligent about analyzing why you're losing deals. So what are we consistently losing for? Is it because we lack X, Y, or Z? Okay, well, now we can't afford to lose these deals, so we got to go build X, Y, and Z. And the last thing I'll say is it's a world full of trade-offs. So everything you say yes to is a no to something else. And that's challenging. I mean, as a CEO, I want to say yes to, a lot more than we're currently saying yes to. And we're just constrained by the limitations of our team.
I'll end on a couple questions here. The first will be the business model. Is it sort of a annual fee for the business? Is it, the business pays per employee? I guess, how does that work from, a small business perspective, versus a Fortune 500 company?
Yeah. So it's an enterprise business play. So we charge our customers annual fees based off number of eligible employees, which, is a great model. There's some additional monetization levers that we're pulling, which is great. It just kind of juices revenue. But it's mostly enterprise SaaS revenue.
Last question I'll have is a little bit on the future. And I know, coming out of, Team Rubicon and, building that up and spending over a decade of your life in it, it's such a great thing to look back on and build something successful. And I think the greatest thing a CEO, an entrepreneur can do is leave it behind and have it thrive without them there, right? That is it's like a kid, going off and doing its own thing and being successful. It's like, wow, it's such a proud thing. And now you look at sort of Groundswell and probably going to be, the next decade of your life, let's say. But what does that next decade look like? Maybe even 3 to 5 years? What does the future look like? What are some of the goals and successes you and the team would like to achieve?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to think in terms of decades right now when you're hooking and jabbing for the next 10 months.
Sure.
It's a tough economic environment and nothing's certain. So, I have the team laser focused on the next year. There's some targets that we have to hit so that we can raise our next round of financing. And we just have to be ruthless in the pursuit of those objectives for the next year. I think, but zooming out, we're a mission-driven company and people are here because we are trying to create lasting change. We're trying to create a paradigm shift in corporate philanthropy. And so as we think about, what does success look like, I would love for donor advised funds to be as ubiquitous in the future as a 401k is today. When you look at the 401k, it was introduced in 1980, and it only took 3 or 4 years for it to eclipse 10 million accounts in the U.S.
Wow.
And now today, I mean, you can't put a job offer in front of somebody for a white collar opportunity without access to a 401k. It would be unheard of. Like you can't possibly do that. You would not be competitive. And we want to get there. And in fact, push it even further. We want tax advantage giving accounts to be offered to employees at any wage level, because 73% of American households give to charity every year. It doesn't matter how much money you're making. The odds are 3 out of 4 households, 3 out of 4 of your employees are given to charity. How can you help them do that more efficiently? And that's the future that we want to see.
Well, thanks so much, Jake, for taking the time, man. I know you're super busy. I know you're building a lot of stuff. Always appreciative when people take time out their day to kind of talk about what they're working on, what they're building, specifically this case, what they're disrupting. It's pretty incredible, man, what you've done so far in life, and best of luck for next decade to come.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me come on and share the story. We love telling the story of Groundswell and Team Rubicon. So anytime, anywhere.